Good morning. Welcome to this week's Negotiation Nugget. This week I am going to talk about fairness and what you should know about fairness in negotiation. Now, when I'm training delegates in negotiation, the concept of fairness comes in all of the time. The desire for fairness, to get a result that is equitable for both parties. There is an assumption that when you're aiming for a win-win result, that actually the result has to be fair, and not necessarily thinking about the components that make up what is construed to be fair. Now, if I'm to break down the concept of fairness just coming from an emotional lens, is the recognition that our brain has three systems: the human brain, which is logical, rational. It has the chimp brain, the primitive brain that is linked to our flight and fight mechanism. And it has our computer brain, which is ultimately a system that's focused on programming. Whatever you're programmed to believe, you can go onto autopilot with that. So if you can imagine driving a car, when you first started out, you were very much in your human brain, very rational, understanding what you didn't know about driving a car. And then over time, you have programmed your brain to essentially know how to drive and then to be on autopilot. Now, what's that got to do with fairness in a negotiation? Well, the recognition there is that when we're thinking about which system is driving us and what each system needs, is the recognition that if we are in our human brain, our logical brain, then we know logically and rationally that life is not fair. And if we are operating from that system of thinking, we would be able to accept that life isn't fair, deal with that situation that was in front of us, and then think about what can be done in order to get the best outcome, to create value with the knowledge and the understanding that life is not fair. Now, in a negotiation, if you are seeking fairness, what you've lost sight of is the use of the system, your human logic brain, and you've switched into your emotional brain, the chimp brain, because the primitive system that we've got around our chimp brain is actually demanding fairness. Because fairness is an emotional reaction, because when we think about it logically and rationally, what is fair? How do we measure fairness? Fairness is so subjective that it's really difficult to articulate how fairness actually manifests in a negotiation. What's valuable to one party may not be valuable to the other party. So if you split the pie in the middle, what does that actually mean? Does that look identical for both parties, even if the need for one party is different for the other? So our logic brain knows that fairness doesn't exist. So if we're demanding fairness, we have switched into our emotional brain and we are thinking with our emotions, which means at that point, you're locked into a way of thinking, your primitive brain, demanding fairness, locked in our emotions, looking at the situation as it is, not being accepting of that situation, and wanting that situation to be different. And it gets caught up in the emotion of, this isn't fair, I don't want this, how can I make it go away, how can I win, rather than how can I get the best outcome for the deal and what's going to get me the best result that I can possibly get, because I know life isn't fair and therefore by default negotiation isn't going to be fair. But if I'm caught in my emotion, guess what? I'm going to demand fairness significantly greater. So what I want you to recognize is that when your chimp gets agitated and you are in your emotional brain, that therefore the deals that you can construct and ultimately create value in are compromised, they're limiting, because if you are looking for fairness, you are absolutely not in your human brain, you are in your chimp brain, you are being driven by your emotions, and therefore you are in charge. You are not in charge, your chimp is in charge of that negotiation. which, when we're thinking about how then emotion plays out in a negotiation, is incredibly dangerous. If you aren't in the logic brain, the rational brain, which as a system is significantly slower than the chimp brain. The chimp brain is far more reactive, it's in the moment, it's much faster in its thinking because it's linked to emotions. The thoughts of this isn't fair, and then the immediate behavior that is driven and that is ensued by that emotion is very, very fast, which means decision making isn't slowed down enough. The reaction rather than the considered response is what you often get, and people move in negotiations in ways that they didn't intend to, or they entrench themselves in positions because instead of recognizing that things aren't fair, they are entrenched in trying to win from an emotional perspective. And then the focus very much becomes on, how do I win? I'm not moving from this position. This is not fair. I want this unfairness to go away. I need to feel like a win, rather than actually, I know things aren't fair in a negotiation. What can I do, and how can I recover value in this deal, recognizing that fairness is totally subjective, and that's not the end game. Because if I'm pursuing fairness, I'm essentially going in with the view that at best I'm going to get 50% of the value in the deal, and at worst I'm potentially losing out. So you're not looking to maximize the value you can get in a negotiation if you're focusing on fairness. Now, what you need to consider instead is, okay, how can I program myself automatically to not react in the emotion around what's unfair, and how can I then give the perception of fairness to the other party? Over the period of time that we've experienced COVID and the global pandemic, we have seen a lot of deals being reneged on. We have seen people walk away from contracts because of supply chain challenges, price inflation, constrained product delivery, and a host of reasons for why contracts have been reneged on. Recognizing that process and recognizing people's human systems and how they think, whether it's the human system in charge, whether it's the chimp brain in charge, is the realization that if humans are at a primitive level wired by our chimp brains at an emotional level to seek fairness, then the memory of that unfair reneging on a deal, moving away from a contract, not fulfilling, is going to be held front and center with the other party. So in a negotiation, you've really got to think about, how am I not only reprogramming my computer brain, which thinks significantly faster, it's 20 times faster than my human brain and 4 times faster than my chimp brain, to believe and already be aware that life isn't fair, negotiation therefore isn't fair. How can I program it to already accept what the current situation is and look for opportunity to create value and move forward? With that, how can I use my computer brain also to be on autopilot, to recognize that not everyone has the same level of emotional intelligence, and if the counterparty that is being dealt with is highly emotional, is very much in their chimp brain, guess what? They are going to need to feel like they've had a win and a fair deal in order to be able to say yes to your proposal, to feel like if you've reneged on a deal in the past and you're back at the table, that you've got to really work to earn their trust so that it's fair, that they get the maximum share of the deal that you're negotiating, because they're carrying this emotion of, well, hold on a minute, what you did previously in walking away wasn't fair. So when we start to recognize that it's the primitive system in our heads, our chimp brain, that's seeking fairness, what we can start to do using our human brain first is to slow down, plan our responses, to acknowledge that the other party may be in their emotional brain, and therefore their reactions aren't necessarily going to be rational. They're not going to make sense, and they may walk away from something that is actually really good for them because they're in their emotion and they're seeking to punish you rather than accept the opportunity to deal in a business transaction again, because actually they're not in their rational logic brain. So when you can start to recognize that, it's taking your planning to the next level around fairness is to go, one, what is the perception of the other party around fairness? How can we influence that perception of fairness? In what way can we help them feel that we're really having to work to meet their objectives on the deal without necessarily capitulating, but planning language, the way the process is delivered, the moves you make, the sequencing of the dialogue, to really give them the impression that actually what you're doing is perceived as fair rather than unfair. Because if we don't recognize the emotional role that is played in a negotiation, and you are letting emotion at the table through the impact that you're having on the other party, then you're missing the opportunity to create value. So when it comes to fairness, recognize this. One, there is no place for fairness in negotiation. Two, nothing in life is fair. It is about the perception of fairness, however. And if you can acknowledge that you're chimp, when you're seeking fairness, you're in your chimp brain, you're focused on winning, and that is not going to serve you in looking for value. Work to stop that chimp taking over and program your brain and a new belief system, recognizing life isn't fair. How can you accept it, and what value can you create from that foundation? But also be prepared for the chimp of the other party, the emotional brain taking over, seeking fairness and wanting a perceived fair deal. Because if you give the perception of fairness whilst recognizing their emotional need for that, you have a greater chance of having that proposal accepted. So I hope that little negotiation nugget this week lands with you when it comes to the concept of fairness. And I'll be back next week to share another negotiation nugget. Have a great week.